Okay.
All right, welcome everyone. So tonight is the kickoff for something that LISSA has decided to start this semester with an alumni speaker series. So we are going to host three UNCG alumni from different fields, in librarianship, and have them share what they've been up to since graduating. So tonight we have Derek Long. As you can see, he is head of the Marr Sound Archives at the University of Missouri in Kansas City. And so before I welcome him, I wanted to tell you to mark your calendars for November 2nd and November 16th for the rest of the series. Thank you. Thanks, Derek.
Thanks, Karen. Can everybody see my slides okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I have two screens and my slides are on this screen over here. So sometimes I'm going to be looking over here, but just in case you were wondering. So I'm going to start off just telling you a little bit about the Marr Sound Archives, and then I'll kind of go over my path of how I got into the field within librarianship that I'm in. So the Marr Sound Archives, which is located at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. And I'll say I grew up in North Carolina, and I don't think I ever knew that Kansas City was actually in Missouri. There is a Kansas City, Kansas, but when people refer to Kansas City, they're usually referring to Kansas City, Missouri. That's where the big city is. So anyway, the Marr Sound Archives is a collection of over 400,000 AV items, and that's on 54 different formats, and that's different types of video, film, and all sorts of audio. We have mostly audio. We do have only about 10,000 of those items are of moving image material. So some of the things we do tours of the space, not now because of COVID, but we used to do tours, and we'd actually do quite a few tours. We would bring classes in. We'd also bring, we'd let the public come in, and we'd give tours to the public. We have a lot of playback equipment, like old equipment, like Edison cylinder players, turntables, old Victrolas, things like that. And we actually demonstrate those to the folks that come in for tours. And we talk about the history of recorded sound, the different eras of recorded sound, and we'll actually play some of the playback equipment so people can actually see how that works. We do some instruction. We work with some faculty members, develop assignments using parts of the collection. A lot of the things listed here, like instruction, archival research, community outreach, these are a lot of things that most archives do. It's just where these are things that are specific to our specialty of the type of format we have. So the instruction can be a little different because, a lot of times when people want to do, faculty members want their students to experience an archive, they actually physically want to come in the archive. So we have to, teach people how to use a turntable and things like that so they can listen to some of our items. Archival research, as I mentioned, we see ourselves like any other archive as far as content goes. So instead of papers and photos and maps and things like that might be in our traditional archive, we focus on AV materials, but we see the content on those AV materials just as important as anything that's on paper, because these are primary resources that have very important cultural and historical content on them. So we get contacted by people all over the world who find our catalog or our finding aids online, and they contact us wanting to use the collection. So it's used in scholarly articles, it's used in documentaries. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Ken Burns, but he's used our collections for his country music documentary, his jazz documentary. He's got one coming out on Hemingway, where he used a film from our collection. And it's also used by like journalists, internationally, locally, like the BBC, CBS, a lot of organizations have used our collections. Sorry, I thought I saw a chat, but then it just popped up. Okay, and then community outreach. So we do a lot of things in the community where we work with other institutions. A lot of that will be like exhibits. We recently worked with the American Jazz Museum, which is in Kansas City, on a Charlie Parker exhibit, who is one of the godfathers of bebop jazz, and he was born in Kansas City. So we worked with them on curating an exhibit and providing audio and some materials from our collections for that exhibit. We work with some other institutions, but also an important part of community outreach is talking to people in the community, working with people who are historically relevant in the community, have contributed to various communities. A big push now is trying to assist underrepresented communities in their archiving efforts, and that might not necessarily mean that we are trying to take on their collections, but we want to help out and give them resources and try to help them, either if they want to donate, we do offer that, or if we can point them in a direction, like the Black Archives of Mid-America is in Kansas City. So if it's more relevant for that institution, we'll try to, potentially point them in that direction. So that's some of the general things that we do in the archives. I'm going to get into a little more of that, but first thing I wanted to do was go over my educational and professional path a little bit, so you understand like how I got to the position that I'm in. So back in the early 2000s, I started collecting records. I was DJing. I bought a beat machine. I was like using records to make sample-based music and things like that. And I was like, oh, I'd like to, do something like this for a career. I'll just get into audio engineering. So I went to Full Sail University, which is a for-profit school in Florida, and they have programs like filmmaking, graphic design, game design, stuff like that. But I got a degree in, it's associate's degree in audio engineering. You can probably see from my next slide, or for my next picture, after that, it didn't go so well after I graduated because the industry just like fell out because the technology for recording audio became very cheap, and a lot of people were just doing it at home. So there wasn't much money in audio engineering. So I decided to go back to school. I'm from Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which is very near Greensboro, and I wanted to stay in the area at that time. So I applied and I went to school to get my history degree because I always liked to read and do research. So I decided I wanted to get a degree in history, and while I was there, I waited too long to get my to do my credits for foreign language. So then I ended up just while I was there getting another degree, bachelor's degree in anthropology, because I started taking anthropology classes and really enjoyed those. So I got a bachelor's from UNCG in history and anthropology. And I thought, I was like, well, maybe I'll, be a, or maybe, I was thinking about like going and get a PhD to be a history professor. But after going to school for a while, I realized I didn't really want to do that. It wasn't for me. So in 2010, I graduated from a bachelor's, or with my bachelor's in 2011. In 2010, this document came out from the Library of Congress. It's the State of Recorded Sound Preservation in the United States, a National Legacy at Risk in the Digital Age. And basically, this document outlines that there are a lot of recordings in the United States that are in institutions that don't really have the resources, the staff resources, or monetary resources, the equipment to preserve the items. And as a history and anthropology major, I was very, I could, it meant something to me that, I was like, oh, this stuff is, being lost because, and I'll get into that a little bit later on some of the details of this, because I'll have some examples I can show you. But a lot of the materials that are on AV formats are degrading rapidly, and the content on it is degrading rapidly. So if we lose it, we're essentially losing part of our cultural heritage and history. And, it's kind of, for me, fit with my background in audio and history and anthropology. But I was like, what do I need to do to be able to like do this work? And, I was like, well, basically I would need some sort of education in librarianship or archives. So I decided to go to the LIS program at UNCG. And when I went, I basically like already kind of knew like what I wanted to do. So I just focused like all of my assignments around AV preservation. So like anything where I could like kind of pick, what area I wanted to, do an assignment on, that's what I would do. And then I also got in contact with the Southern Folklife Collection at UNC Chapel Hill, because they have facilities to preserve their AV content. And so I did my practicum there, and I did an independent study there to get some experience. That was like the first place I really got like hands-on experience with AV preservation. And with that, I mean, that really helped me a lot to kind of get my first job, because if I hadn't done those two things, I'm not sure I would have been able to get my first job, because I really needed that experience. So when I graduated in 2013, I got a job at the State Archives of Florida, and I worked with this team called the Florida Memory Team. And basically it's like an online platform, but I was the audio archivist. So I just digitized audio recordings from the Florida Folklife collection, and I would create metadata for it and make the items available online. Stayed there for a couple of years. Then I was actually at a library conference and met my wife, and she lived in Kansas City. And so we, dated for a while, remotely, or not remotely, distance dating. And then I decided I was just going to move to Kansas City, and I didn't have a job or anything at the time. So when I got here, I ended up getting a part-time job at MCC Community College, and it was definitely, it's not what I wanted to do, but I learned a lot because I was doing reference and instruction for the community college. So I kind of filled out some of the areas that I wasn't as comfortable with. Overall, I think it helped a lot. But at the same time, I was also volunteering in the Marr Sound Archives. So when I got here, like I immediately already knew some of the people that worked here. So immediately got in contact with them, just because I know I needed to stay in the field and kind of be up to date and, make sure my name was still, known in these circles. So it would be easier for me to get a job when one came open, which it did. And I was lucky enough to get this position. Originally, it was the Marr Sound Archives librarian. And then I was made head of the Marr Sound Archives about a year and a half into having the position. So yeah, again, I feel very fortunate to have the position I do have, especially in a field that is, there are other institutions that have similar archives as this, but there aren't a whole lot of jobs in the area. So I do feel lucky to have one. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Sound Archives. This is a photo of our LP collection. It's about 200,000 LPs, so it's almost half of our collection. So these are mostly commercially published materials of all types of musical genres, rock, blues, R&B, jazz, opera. That's kind of runs the gamut of of commercial recordings. And then you see on the end there, there's some of our playback equipment. There's like an Edison cylinder player there, and a couple of 78 machines, and some of those will demonstrate to people when they take a tour. And this picture is of our automated storage and retrieval system. So this is actually attached to the library, so we have direct access to it. It's not off. A lot of people, their storage like this is off campus or somewhere else, but this is actually attached to our building. So this was built, I think, 11 or 12 years ago, and this was kind of in the era when libraries were, like, oh, we got to get these books out of here. We got to make space for students to study and have more open space. And so what our university did to facilitate that was they moved 800,000 books they built this machine and moved 800,000 books into it. But we also use it for archival storage too. So there's 3 rows or 2 or 3 aisles. And there's like 2 aisles that kind of look like this, and they have mostly books in them. But then there's also an aisle that has like these larger shelving units where you can put boxes on them. So we use that aisle a lot because we use archival boxes to put our materials in, and then we put them in that aisle. And it's temperature and humidity controlled, so it's good for an archival environment. And it allows us to collect a lot of stuff because it's gigantic. This is just to give you an idea of some of the formats in the collection. So, I mean, this ranges from like early 1900s to early 2000s. So we have, some of the early like Edison cylinders. We have early 78 RPM discs. We have the vinyl disc. We have open reel tape, various types of tape, CDs. The one I wanted you to kind of look at, because there's going to be a comparison on the next slide, is if you look at the bottom left-hand corner of that disc, it's a 16-inch disc, and it's a lacquer disc. So basically a lacquer disc, it's like it has a metal base, and then they wrap lacquer around it. And a lot of times for the 16-inch disc like this, radio stations would use them to record broadcasts. So what they would just get like blanks. So this one you see has grooves on it, but when the radio station would get it, it would just be like a blank disc, and they would have a disc cutter. And so when they were recording the broadcast, they would put the disc cutter on and record the broadcast through the disc cutter and cut the grooves directly into the disc. And these are the most at-risk AV, or I would say the most at-risk sound recording format that we have. And we have about 12,000 of these, but this is what happens to them. This is called delamination. And what happens is the lacquer basically develops a palmitic acid, which is apparently harmless to humans, I'm told. But it makes the lacquer shrink, and when the lacquer shrinks, it breaks apart. So, this disc, there's no saving the disc. It's like when this happens, like the content, whatever was on the disc, any of the content, whatever it was, we don't know, is gone. So we're trying to prevent that from happening by preserving all of these as quickly as possible. So that's one of our top priorities. And so how we preserve things in the AV world is digitizing them. So that's the archival standard. I mean, you want to conserve the actual format as long as you possibly can, but long term, really the only thing you can do if you want to have that content in the future is to digitize it and then preserve the digital format. So this is kind of where my background in audio comes into play, because I would know how to use the audio equipment and the software and just know how all these things work. So I oversee our preservation studios. We have 2 different preservation studios here on campus. And we can do almost all of our different formats. Most of the audio we can do, there's more of the video. There's a lot of weird video formats that we're unable to do. And with those, at some point, we'll need to figure out whether we're going to do them in-house and try to get the equipment or outsource them. But one of the issues with equipment is a lot of it, was made so long ago and it's not made anymore. There's limited supplies, so you have to like buy all this used equipment and kind of cobble together, this equipment to play the stuff back. And then if it breaks, it's like, sometimes it's hard to find somebody to fix it. So the format degradation is as much of a problem as the playback equipment. So this is how much audio is digitized. I wouldn't say audio. This is actually how much AV content is digitized in the Marr Sound Archives. And it's a little more drastic. It appears more drastic than it is. And I kind of do that for effect. And I don't know why my number's not showing up. This number up here at the top that's supposed to be digitized is 19,000 items, or 5%. I don't know why it's not there. Anyway. So as I mentioned, out of our 400,000 items we have in the archives, 200,000 are LP recordings. And so a lot of those are like commercial recordings. And, we're not that concerned about it. One, vinyl is actually the most stable format, lasting up to what scientists say from researching, scientifically doing tests on the format, that vinyl, as long as it's taken care of, can last up to 1,000 years. So we're not too concerned about vinyl in general, but also because like a lot of that stuff was very popular. So, we have stuff like Beatles or, Aretha Franklin, all this stuff that we don't really have to worry about because there's plenty of copies out there and we don't have to worry about digitizing it. So a lot of the stuff we have, we're not really worried about it. We're never going to digitize it. But there's probably around like 100,000 items that are unique. When I say unique, I mean like one of a kind, like they weren't published. It's things like interviews that people created, field recordings, broadcasts, speeches, live performances. And those are the things that we concentrate on most because they are unique. And if we don't digitize them, then they could potentially be lost forever. So access to our AV materials, we do some physical access. It's a little different now because of COVID, so we're by appointment only. So you can only come in if you have an appointment. We don't let people just walk in now because we have such a small space. But we do let people listen to certain items. You'll probably already know that since some of our items are degrading and we digitize them, we don't let people listen to those items, the physical items, but all the LPs we let people listen to. So that's a lot of what people come in and listen to. Otherwise, for a lot of our content, we digitize it. So if it's already digitized, that's easily made available. But if somebody requests something that hasn't been digitized yet, we have the capabilities to digitize a lot of our stuff. And, that's obviously ideal because we can make things available to people all over the world. And sometimes it depends on the situation. I mean, there's like copyright issues and things like that. So it's like sometimes we'll provide a copy that they can download. Sometimes, because we do have the capability to put up a recording that they can stream but not download. Of course, I think if someone knows what they're doing, they could really get it if they wanted a copy of it, they could make one. But we do try to make our materials available digitally when we can, but we can't always do that depending on the situation. So discovery for AV materials, it's where things can get kind of messy when you're trying to provide reference for stuff like this because it's in several different places. So we have finding aids, and that's basically what the standard is for archival materials. So instead of like cataloging it like you would a book, finding aids for like an entire collection of stuff. So if somebody donated, you know, all of their like papers and pictures and stuff, it'd be like, you know, the so-and-so papers collection. And like everything within that collection would be listed in the finding aid. In the past, my organization was just using like Word, Excel spreadsheets, which obviously is not a database, but you know, it's fine for like the front end user, but like just to search like one collection. But when you don't have a database, you know, you don't have any links between any of the collections. So we're actually in the middle of implementing Archive Space, which is basically kind of the main archival management system used in the field, and it's open source. So that's been an interesting process, working with lots of spreadsheets. When I was going to school, I never realized how much I was going to be working in Excel spreadsheets because it has been out of control. There's also the library catalog. I am not a cataloger. I don't do any cataloging, but we send some of our commercial collections to the catalogers, and then they catalog it, put it in our library catalog, but then it lives in our space. So this stuff is available for our local catalog, but it's also, you know, an OCLC, so you can, it's available on like WorldCat, which is, you know, how a lot of people find us, is they find us in, you know, WorldCat before, you know, and contact us. And then there's also our asset management system. We have Islandora, and basically it has a Fedora repository back end and then a Drupal front end, and Islandora kind of makes the two work together. And it's just like a bunch of modules and stuff for our online platform. And I can show you what that looks like, but basically what the asset management system is for is for preserving the digital objects, and then provides metadata about those digital objects. So here's a record of a 1937 radio broadcast recording from our collection. So you can see we have the audio file that you can play in the media player. That's just a picture of the disc up there, not the whole disc, but the label of the disc is what's pictured there. On the right, you can see all the metadata for the program. So I don't know if any of you are into metadata or want to do metadata work, but this is the mods schema that we use for our metadata. And then on the left, under the player, it's a transcript, and we're using this module called the Oral History Solution Pack, and basically it lets you upload a transcript where it can like break the transcript down like line by line and have an audio cue for each one. So if you were like going through this and like reading it, then you could just like hit that cue on the left and it would play from that point in the audio. Now this is a very slow process, transcribing, that is, like, but I guess a silver lining with the when we all went remote from COVID is that we had a lot of people that needed work to do because their work was tied to the physical space. And now that they weren't in the physical space, they didn't have as much work to do. So I started a project where people could download audio files and create transcripts. And then we had like a shared space to keep track of everything. So ended up, so far, I mean, we're back at work now. We're going to do part remote and part on campus. But we've gotten about 400 transcripts done since COVID started. So it's probably, well, and it's interesting. There's like, because I've been going to some presentations and panel discussions about, you know, what people are doing during the time of COVID. And I am definitely not the only one who thought about doing this, because there's a lot of other places who are doing the same thing with their audio and moving image collections, is having people transcribe it while they're working remotely. This is one of the last things I'll show, and I have it on here because it happened recently. I wrote a grant for the Clear Recordings at Risk grant, and we were lucky enough to be awarded for the grant, and it was to preserve some 1940s radio broadcasts on severely damaged lacquer disc. So I already told you about lacquer disc, but one of the things I didn't mention was during the 1940s, during World War II, the U.S. military was using all the metal for the war, and so those discs, they were, had the aluminum metal base that the lacquer was wrapped around. But since they couldn't use metal, they decided to use glass. So you have a 16-inch wide piece of thin glass. So as you can probably imagine, they break really easily. So that's mostly what the discs were that I wrote the grant for, were these glass discs. And we couldn't digitize them by any traditional means on a turntable. So we had NEDCC, which is Northeast Document Conservation Center. They have this machine, and it's called Irene. And it's basically this technology where it takes super, super high resolution scans of inside the groove of the disc. And it takes these high resolution scans of the entire, everything within all the grooves in the entire disc. And then they have a software that basically puts all the images together to create the audio sound from the images, which I explained it. I had no idea how it works, but that is the general idea. But I don't know. It's cool, super complicated. The guy who created it, he worked on the Hadron Collider in Europe, and basically used the same technology for capturing images of the particles in the particle accelerator. But yeah, so anyway, there's only 3 of these in the world. There's one at NEDCC, and so we wrote a grant for them to be able to scan and digitize these discs. It is super expensive and it's very slow. I think, let's see. So to give you an idea of how expensive this is, it was so $33,000. That was just to ship 30 discs to have digitized. So that's it. It was just all the money's going to NEDCC except for the shipping. So, it's over $30,000 for them to digitize 30 discs. And it's going to take them 230 hours or something like that. So while it's cool, it is ultra expensive and extremely slow. So it should really only be used on materials that can't be digitized any other way. I got a couple of resources here. If you are interested in learning more about the field of AV preservation and archiving, there's Associated for Recorded Sound Collections, which I've been heavily involved with. There's also Equivalent Association, but it's international. I haven't been as involved with them, but they do have some great, if you go to their website, they have some great materials for learning about audio digitization and stuff like that. If you're more interested in film or video, there's Association of Moving Image Archivists. So that's specifically for moving image materials. And then there's the Society of American Archivists. And in general, Society of American Archivists has a lot of great resources, but they do also have a recorded sound roundtable, which is specifically for recorded sound. So yeah, those are a few things. And if you're interested, I can point you in directions of specific publications or anything like that. If you're interested, you can just let me know. You can feel free to email me if you'd like. And that is pretty much all I had to present, but I'm definitely up for taking any questions that you all might have.
Hey.
Hey.
Thanks for doing this talk. First of all, I really have no knowledge in this field whatsoever, so it was really interesting just to kind of get a glance in it. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm a first-year student, so I'm still trying to evaluate what kinds of classes I should take with a look at archival work. So do you remember any classes that really had an impact on the kind of work you're doing now, or any skills you learned while doing independent study?
Sure. I mean, to be honest, I think Fatih's classes were probably the most useful for me. Because at the time, I don't think he teaches a database class anymore, but I'm guessing he still does a metadata class, or somebody's doing a metadata class. I would definitely take that. I mean, just like, because all of these systems, or if you're trying to do anything that's like kind of like the background, like you're doing like either metadata cataloging, archival processing, there's a lot of similarity in just like knowing how the systems work. And so if you can take like any like metadata classes or learn about digital libraries, I would definitely take those classes. There wasn't an archival class when I was at UNCG. I don't know if there is now, but yeah, I think for me, learning about, because to me, like when I was going, I was like, I mean, digital was kind of what I wanted to focus on, because I knew that was where a lot of the work that I was doing was going to be. So that's really where I focused.
Gotcha. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. I'm learning Excel. That's also good.
I really enjoyed this presentation as well. I have only learned, I'm not focusing on archives, but I always love when there's a lecture connected to archives because it's just interesting stuff. But when you were talking about the lacquered discs, you mentioned how they couldn't be repaired, but then the glass ones can't, like the machine can repair them, but.
Well, I'll go back to.
It's only like if they warp.
No, they don't warp. So actually this one is glass that you can see here, but so when that stuff like flakes off, they can't really put that back together. So I guess let me just try to bring up a picture. It'll be easier for me to explain. I have one that I can get to easily.
Perfect.
All right, let's see. Good one. Okay. You see that one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So like you said, it's like because the grooves are all still there, the lacquer is not flaking off, but it's just broken. So when they do a scan of that, it's pretty easy for them to scan it because all the grooves are still intact. It's just if you try to play that on a turntable, you can't play it on a turntable. So basically the grooves have to be there in order for Irene to be able to capture the groove. So they can do that, but with this one, they can't do that because the grooves have like flaked off. And like if you could take all the grooves and like if you could put all the pieces back together, they could potentially do it. But it'd be kind of a nightmare.
Yeah, that would be really challenging.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting field of work that I got to work in, and I have to remind myself of that sometimes. It's like, this is pretty cool.
I liked how your kind of path like took you to librarianship. Like you didn't initially consider it, but then it just seemed to work out. Like that's what you're supposed to work.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I mean, because honestly, I didn't know anything about librarianship really when I was getting my undergrad, and it was yeah, I mean, it was pretty much this, like I said, that document that the Library of Congress published really like changed my trajectory. I was just like, hey, this is something I, have passion for, and I felt like I had a good background for it. So, and then when I went to library school, I was like, I didn't know exactly what to expect, but I was, I really liked it, and I'm really glad I did it, even though I didn't know exactly what I was getting into at the time.